Well, hello, everybody. It's Bruce Rivers here. I'm the Executive Director at Covenant House in Toronto. It's my honor to welcome you to our very first Facebook Live broadcast entitled The Realities of Sex Trafficking in Canada. For those that are not aware, Covenant House Toronto has grown to be the largest organization of its kind in the country working with homeless, at-risk, and trafficked youth. We actually began that work back in 1982, and since we opened our doors at that time, we were seeing survivors and victims of sex trafficking. We didn't call it that back in the 80s, but it certainly continued to be a major challenge for the young people coming through our doors. And with that, we've seen incredible growth in both the problems, but as well as the programs to address those issues and to assist the young people moving forward. In fact, last year we worked with upwards of 90 young women who have had various experiences with sex trafficking. So with that brief introduction, it's my honor to introduce to you Julie Neubauer. Hi, Julie.
Hey,
great
Bruce.
to see you.
Nice to be here.
Julie's the manager of our human trafficking program here at Covenant House, and I'm going to have an opportunity to ask Julie some questions, but you too can submit questions, and please feel free to do so through Facebook. And I just wanted to shout out to Tracy here. Tracy is the person who leads up our communications area at Covenant House, and she's going to be receiving your questions and providing them to us. So if we don't get to your question, though, be assured that we'll do so prior to the next webcast, and we will do so on a timely basis. So with that, I just wanted to start, Julie, with a general and a very broad question. But could you tell us what is sex trafficking?
Sex trafficking, Bruce, is when a person through means of luring or coercion, trickery, manipulation, is forced to sell their body for the money, for making money for other people. It happens in a variety of different ways. Sometimes it's through a romance scenario where the young woman believes that she is becoming involved in a typical normal relationship with an individual, and it quickly turns into something different, where he is asking her to sell her body, forcing her to sell her body for the means of making money for himself. Other times it happens in different situations where she's forced to do so. It happens in a variety of different places across Ontario, across Canada, small communities, large cities. Young women are lured or meet their pimps and traffickers in high school settings. There is not a single place where it occurs anymore.
Thanks, Julie. Julie, how is sex trafficking different from sex work?
I'm really glad that you raised that issue, that there is a lot of discussion around that specifically. When we talk about sex trafficking, we're talking about sexual exploitation. We are talking about the young women that we see, 194 since we began gathering data in 2016.
Wow.
And these are young women who do not want to be involved in sex work, who come to us and say that they don't want to be involved anymore, who identify with the things that I was saying before around that they were lured, that they were manipulated, or they were forced into it. We're not talking about people who are entering into sex work by choice. It's a very different conversation.
Okay, for those that are just joining, it's Bruce Rivers here. I'm the Executive Director at Covenant House, and I'm talking with Julie Neubauer, who heads up our program in the area of sex trafficking. And we're talking about this issue and how broad in its nature it is and how widespread it is. And with that, if you have any questions, please feel free to submit them. We will respond. Julie, just back to how widespread this is. Could you speak to that across the country?
Certainly could.
Yeah.
So this is something that I want to, I've got a little bit of a graphic here. So 96% of young people that we provide service to are Canadian citizens. This is not an issue that is happening only in across the seas, across the ocean.
96% of the
the
young women
people
that you're seeing in the sex trafficking program here. Okay.
are Canadian citizens. And that's not to say that sex trafficking doesn't happen across the world, but it is, I challenge the myth that people believe that it only happens in Thailand or Vietnam or in Eastern Europe. That it's happening in Toronto, that it's happening in Ontario, that it's happening in Montreal and across the country in great numbers.
Interesting, because I think, you know, a lot of folks think that this is an issue that's affecting young women who are from other places, that they're not our girls.
As the saying goes, it's in our own backyard, and it's just like a girl, you know, that these are young people who cross the demographic boundaries. When we first began this work in 2013, most of the young women we served back then, and in our first year, we met 42 young women in our first year alone. And most of these young women came to us via the relationship with our crisis shelter at 20 Gerrard. And these were young women who were vulnerably housed, who were coming from child welfare backgrounds, who were coming from families that were atypical, that were maybe didn't have a mom and a dad. And what we have found since those 5 years, which it's now 2019, that we are meeting more and more young women who don't fit that demographic anymore, that it is by their virtue of femaleness that they are being lured and groomed, recruited, and becoming involved in this. They're coming from family homes where mom and dad are in the home. We are meeting young women who are enrolled in high school, post-secondary.
But who would be at most risk? You know, with those young women you're highlighting there, who would be at most risk?
Again, that's something that we've changed our notion of who is at most risk over the last years working this. We used to talk about low self-esteem. We used to talk about being vulnerably housed. We used to talk about those things, being involved in child welfare, and all those things remain as risk factors. We recognize that a lot of the young women with whom we work right now, those are some of their vulnerabilities. But again, it's by virtue of their femaleness that they're deemed to be vulnerable by the traffickers, who are predators and who look for the vulnerabilities in their victims.
Okay. All right. So tell me more about, like, how does this happen? Where is it happening? Just give us a sense of that.
Absolutely. It happens, unfortunately, it happens everywhere. Again, it's one of those things that crosses demographics, that we're meeting young women from small Northern Ontario towns. We're meeting people from York region, from the Niagara region, from the GTA, from Toronto, from Durham region. We're meeting young women who are trafficked from across Canada. That one of the things that the traffickers do is that they move them across Canada to avoid detection and to be able to saturate the different markets.
So I understand the 401 is a major corridor?
It absolutely is. And so it's a fast-moving river of cars that they can get on and off without detection. There's a lot of hotels and motels that span that highway. And it's easy access for them. They can get on and off and move rather quickly. It's also an opportunity for the traffickers to discombobulate, to confuse the young ladies, that they don't know what town they're in next as they move across that.
So in a city like Toronto, like, where might this be occurring in this city?
If you look out the window, if you're sitting in an office building right now on your break, watching our webcast, or if you're at home, look out your window and look at the condominiums, look at the hotels that are in and around your communities, the big hotel chains, the small motel chains. A lot of the Airbnbs are being used. A lot of the condominiums that are cropping up in and around the downtown core are actually being rented, leased, or purchased by the traffickers for expressly this purpose. So again, it's not one place.
So, by the way, if you just joined us, it's Bruce Rivers here at Covenant House, and I'm talking with Julie Neubauer, who's the manager of our human trafficking, sex trafficking program here at Covenant House. And if you have any questions, please feel free to submit them through Facebook. We'd be delighted to address those. Julie, can you just tell us a little more about, you mentioned luring, and could you also talk about grooming?
Right. So when we began the conversation, Bruce, I referenced that I talked about the definition of what sex trafficking is, and it is when someone is groomed, lured, recruited, forced, tricked into selling their body to make money for somebody else. And I briefly alluded to how that happens, and I talked about this thing called the boyfriend scenario, the Romeo Pimp. What happens in a lot of the cases with whom the young women that we work with, that they enter into what they believe to be a romantic relationship.
Okay.
That we were talking with a young woman just the other day who, as she was walking up Yonge Street on her way to an appointment, was approached by a man who stopped her and said, "Good Lord, you're beautiful." And to which she responded, she made eye contact with him, and she said, "Thank you, I don't know you," and attempted to keep walking.
Yeah.
She made eye contact with him, she paused. That gave him an opportunity for an in. So he pursued her and walked in front of her again. He wasn't touching her, but he said, I'm serious. You are stunning. I would like to get to know you better. Wow. And so the relationship was struck. Yeah. She believed him to be sincere. She was flattered by his flattery, and felt that he was okay. So they exchanged numbers, and they made plans then to go out for dinner later on. That's pretty, that's the whole notion of stranger danger. You have to have your guard up. A lot of other young ladies are approached through social media, so that they are on normalized dating sites, Plenty of Fish and Tinder, on Instagram, where they are approached by individuals who, it's the very same comments that this young man that I described saying, "You're beautiful, I like your picture, can we get to know each other better?" So they believe that they are entering into a boyfriend-girlfriend partner relationship. And then what happens is that after that period of wooing, after that period of grooming, the fellow will, if he's interested in moving it towards this kind of a sex trafficking purpose, he will initiate, ask her to do something for him that she may not be comfortable. Would you be comfortable in letting me take some photos of you? Would you be comfortable in having sex with this person? He may introduce it as a means for them to build a nest egg, for them to make some money, in that attempt to create that notion of, we're going to do this together. I love you. Don't you want to be together in order for us to have this white picket fence? They're selling the dream, they're selling the romance, and they involve her in the pursuit of that. We only need to do this for a short period of time. I'll protect you. I'll make the dates. You won't have to do anything that you don't want to do. And quickly it turns from that into her having no control, to doing things that she doesn't want to do, and to not seeing any of the money. Okay. So it's a very slippery slope. It's a very insidious.
And it starts, as you say, with that Romeo Pimp approach. I think we have a question, right, Tracy?
Yes, we have a question from Christopher.
He's
wondering, do you support young men who are vulnerable and exploited as well?
Great question.
Thanks, Christopher. So the number of young people that we see, I said it's 194. Presently, only 4 of those have been young men. We do not believe that that is an accurate representation of the people who are out there. We absolutely support young men who come to us identifying as being involved in sex trafficking, who are introduced to us by other agencies as being at risk or involved in sex trafficking, or in sex work and wanting to find a way to exit if that's their choice. Recognizing that the stigma for young men to come forward and talk about this is pretty profound and pretty great. We found the numbers of young women who would be open to disclosing had to grow as we had more of these conversations. So I am so happy that you raised that issue, because I think that the more we talk about it, the more young men will recognize that this is an issue that affects them as well, that parents will recognize that this is an issue that that could affect their young children, their boys, their young men in their lives.
Yeah, great question, Christopher. Thank you for that. Can we go back? You were talking then about the luring phenomena. Can you also talk about grooming? And then, I think there's a lot of people might think, well, as this starts to occur and you get to a dark place, why don't young women leave?
That's a good question. So as I described, that there's a relationship. So the young woman, if she begins her exploitation by this grooming, by this relationship, she's in love with this individual. There's a clinical term, a psychological term that talks about a trauma bond. And essentially what that means is that by the virtue that she fell in love with this individual, that she believes him to be her boyfriend, that he has had an intimate relationship with her, where they have all the trappings of a normal relationship. So when she is asked to do these things, she does them. She may have that trepidation in her tummy about this may not be what I want to do. She may even say that to him, and he will find ways, and he will have a script to address those fears for her.
Okay.
And in the same way, when she begins to play out those notions in her head of, I don't want to do this anymore, he may cajole her into staying, say it's only for a brief period of time, or he may threaten her. There may be a point that the relationship changes, and he says, there's absolutely no way you're leaving. You owe us money. You need to work off this debt. And I now have information about you that I will tell your parents, tell your sister, tell the community, and we'll use that as a way to keep her in. Most of the young women that we talk to, it's more about that I love him. I can't leave him. I won't go to the police. I don't want to do anything with this because he's my guy.
And that's part of that trauma bond.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Okay. So if you're just joining us, we're talking about sex trafficking in Canada, the work that's been occurring here at Covenant House in Toronto, and I'm speaking with Julie Neubauer, who manages that program. If you have any questions of your own, please feel free to submit them. We will answer those, and if we can't do it on air, we'll be doing it in between this episode and our next one. So, Julie, I just wanted to go back to some information that you provided earlier on. So what you're describing is that there can be a fair amount of power and control here.
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely.
Could you say more about that, how that gets expressed? And
it gets expressed in a number of different ways, and I think that it begins at the beginning of the relationship. So if a young woman enters the relationship with the belief that it is a boyfriend, that he will reinforce behaviors that are desirable. He will get other things to happen. If you think about how it's behavior modification, if that makes sense to people, that if you want someone to do something for you, there are things that you could do to reward them, and there are things that you can do to punish them. So that's the very nature of a lot of this trauma bond. If you think about people who are kept prisoners of war and who believe certain things about them, that's exactly what's happening in a lot of these cases where the trauma bond is established. Often they are, if the relationship is not begun in a romantic way and it's done in a coercive or a forced way, then it's by pure fear and intimidation. That there are young women who, through a number of means of getting involved in sex trafficking, when they attempt to leave or where they express a desire that this is not what they signed up for, this is not how they want to be involved anymore, and they say to their trafficker, their business partner, or whatever they believe them to be, I want to tap out, I'm done. And he will say, again, absolutely not. He may show her a firearm that he has kept hidden for the last little while, and he will use that to intimidate her. He may, as part of their relationship, have talked about people that he had altercations with, people that he beat up with. He may boast as part of that to keep her in check, to say that, you know what, I've done that.
This too could happen to you.
Exactly, Bruce, exactly.
So, earlier on you were talking about that there's been an increase in the incidents and online use of the internet, such social media, but physically with the trafficking, say in Toronto, where is this occurring? Like, where does this take place?
We're finding, we're speaking to increasing numbers of young women who are being worked out of the condominiums in Toronto, who reference a lot of the condominiums that we walk to on our way to and fro the GO train, past the TTC, on our ways to work. Hotels that we go to, that we book ourselves into, as part of the downtown Toronto experience. This is where these young women are working from.
So with that, and you've talked about the issue, what are the signs? What are the symptoms? How would a person know if somebody's in a sex trafficking situation? What might they look for?
So I think that if you're talking about, if I am a parent and if I have a young daughter who's 12,
Yep.
Because for a lot of this, not a lot, but there are increasing numbers of young women who are being lured or who are beginning the grooming process at the age of 12.
Right.
And you know what, I'm just going to pause there just for a second.
Yeah.
And I want to talk about, we're sitting here on Human Trafficking Awareness Day, and we're talking about an issue that is at hand.
Yeah.
I want to talk about prevention just before we
Absolutely.
talk more about it.
Yep.
And I think that you'd probably share this notion is that the biggest preventative measure that we can do as parents, as hoteliers, as cab drivers, in our own communities is to talk about it. This is such a phenomenal forum to have this day dedicated to raising the awareness. The more that we are all aware of the issue of sex trafficking, that it's a reality in our own communities and in Canada,
Right.
That's the biggest preventative measure. That we talk with each other, we talk with our young people, we talk about that it can happen, we talk about what luring looks like, we talk about what grooming looks like,
Yep.
we talk about what consent is, and we talk about what healthy relationships are.
Got it.
So I just wanted to make sure that we talked about that,
really
so that
good point.
if we continue to have these kind of preventative conversations, you know, maybe we're putting ourselves out of business, and in 5 years we won't have to continue to have these trafficking awareness days because the prevention and the discussion, people are going to be able to identify it a lot easier. And it's the interruption of sex trafficking is what we're really after, right?
So if you've just joined us, I'm talking to Julie Neubauer, who's the manager of sex trafficking program here at Covenant House in Toronto. And if you have any questions, please feel free to submit. Julie, just back, because I want to segue to another question, but before I do that, so what might a person in the public notice?
Right.
What would, can you go back to what might be a sign or a symptom of this occurring?
So if we're talking specifically about the public forum, if you are someone who is working in the hotel industry, let's say, for example, or if you're someone who travels a lot for work, or if you're someone who stays in hotels a lot, you will notice that a young woman would check in with a gentleman or a number of gentlemen. She may be the only female. She may arrive with not a lot of luggage. They may check into adjoining rooms, and they may hunker down in those rooms for a couple of days. They may deny room service. And if you were someone, again, who was working in the hotel industry, you were a part of the housekeeping team, you would enter the space and you would recognize that when you did get to clean it, that it was a space that looked like it was used for sex, that there will be condoms in the garbage, that it will have an odor about it, if I can be frank. And I think that a lot of these things is that people need to trust their intuition.
Yeah.
People,
trust your gut.
You got it, exactly. Trust your gut, and if things don't seem right, they're not often going to be right. If you are a cab driver, if you're an Uber driver, if you're a Lyft driver, a lot of our girls are moved around the city in those means.
Yeah.
And again, I would suspect that a lot of those drivers know these young women by name. They know that they're ferrying them back and forth to the condominiums, that the girls are by themselves, that they may be on the phone, that they may be met by individuals or dropped off by individuals. So the signs are really there. So people have to pay attention to them. And in saying that, no one's giving anyone a sheriff's badge. No one's making anybody deputies.
But that's a good segue into the next question I have, which is, okay, so you notice that there's something not quite right. What do you do about that? Right. Where do you go? So
there are, so if you feel that someone's life is in imminent danger, that's another issue altogether. But if you suspect that they're in your hotel or where you work, that maybe sex trafficking is happening, we have a phenomenal team of detectives and officers working for the Toronto Police that are working on the Vice Unit called the Human Trafficking Enforcement Team. And they have a hotline that you can call. They have a telephone number that you can call and reach out to them with any questions that you may have.
Right.
And we can post that telephone number later for our viewers today.
Great.
I would also recommend just simply calling, like you would for any other thing, your local police division and report what you're seeing. So your divisional officers would go out and take a report. They would be able to go and investigate whether it's at a massage parlor or body rub parlor that you feel is in question. If you are living in a condominium and you have suspicions about your next door neighbor where there's a lot of traffic, you talk about the signs, there's a lot of traffic up and down the hallway, that there are a parade of men who go in and out of a condominium. Again, these signs are there that I fully believe that people are watching and either not paying attention to their gut or not taking that next step and reporting it, because again, unfortunately, there does remain that it's none of my business, it's not my business. But it is your business, because these are young women, daughters, sisters, aunts, students. They're members of our community who are involved in this not by their choice.
Thanks, Julie. I'm going to hold you there. I think we have another question. Tracy.
Yes, we have two questions. The first one is from Veronica, and she is wondering, what does Covenant House do to support these women?
I'm quite proud and pleased to say a lot. We do a lot for them. The support that we provide to them begins in our education and prevention, that we go out into schools and talk to young women about the luring, about the issue. Again, going back to that notion of prevention. So before it happens, helping them raise their awareness so that if they're approached on the street or if they're approached on a dating website, that their radar is up to be able to detect what's happening to them. We welcome them into our crisis shelter. So at 20 Gerrard, we have 24 access to shelter where a young person can come in and not identify themselves, male or female. They can come in and say, I need a bed, I need a place to rest, and we will provide them with shelter, food, and a bed for the night. Also, very specifically, we have 2 beds dedicated to this group of young women where they are able to get, again, 24/7 access, but with very specialized services related to their needs. We have an advocate team that is comprised of 4 dedicated individuals who have a combined 20 years of experience working with these young women, and they support them through relationship development. They basically provide them with the initial ear to say, let's go get a coffee. You need your ID? Let's go get your ID. And they really let that young person drive the proverbial boat about what's going to happen next in the relationship.
And you also oversee a couple of specialized programs?
We sure do. We have, in September of 2016, we opened up the Rogers Home, which is a 2-year transitional program for survivors of sex trafficking. And it supports them in their development of life skills and in recovery activities where they can stay free of charge. We provide the food for them. There's 24/7 service. And we have staff who are there to be able to support them in their needs. In November of this past year, we opened up the Avdel Home, which is a shorter-term housing program that meets the needs of more immediate needs for 6 young women. Again, it's 24/7 staffed. Young women can go there as they contemplate their decision to leave the industry, their desire to move on to the next step. So we provide whatever services they want, whether it's helping them in find detox housing, longer term housing, access to counseling.
So a whole array here, residential counseling, also legal supports. Now, I think we have another question. We're running out of time. I know we're getting short.
We have a question from Alex. They're wondering, can you speak to how you see sex trafficking interacting with systemic racism for people with racialized identities, including Indigenous people?
Okay, good question.
So thank you, Veronica, for the previous question. I appreciate that. The Alex or Alice? Alex. Thank you, Alex, for raising that. As I hope we are all aware, missing and murdered Indigenous women across Canada needs to be at the forefront of this conversation in all of our minds as Canadian citizens. That when we talk about where young women are lured from, they are often lured from their communities, from their northern communities. that they are the most vulnerable of the vulnerable. And when we talk about predators and traffickers, these are exactly the individuals that they look for. For young people who are leaving their bands in northern regions, that they come down to the city to complete high school, that they're alone, they're often without their community or their resources. And again, these are the people that the traffickers and the predators are preying upon. That they are missing the connections to be able to tether them. And often people don't, again, because they're vulnerable and fragile by their circumstances of their racial identity or by their cultural identities, this becomes problematic. And again, they become more vulnerable to risks of luring and grooming.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just one last question very quickly, because we have to wrap up.
Yeah.
And it is, why do these survivors need help?
Because they deserve what they deserve. Because for those women, those young people who do not want to be in these circumstances, who do not want to be involved in sex work,
Yeah.
they deserve a way out. They deserve to live their lives with dignity and with options that aren't forced upon them. It's a matter of basic humanity, I think, Bruce.
And you've seen young women come through that whole journey and move on with their lives to independence and fulfillment.
I was going to say I wouldn't do it otherwise. We would do it otherwise, but that's a big outcome, that there is success, that there are these positive outcomes. People will
Right.
always ask about success, and it varies from person to person. But we have relationships with young women who have made it through the stages of change, who are living independently in the community, who continue to have contact with us and share their successes in life, where they are parenting, where they are going to school, where they're engaged in meaningful relationships in their community. Good question. Yeah.
Julie, thanks so much.
Thanks,
Appreciate you spending the time here and, informing everyone. It's been great. I also have huge respect for the work that you and the team do. I just wanted to let folks know that we have a next Facebook Live event planned for March 28th. I want to thank you all for coming in on this event and would encourage you to do the same on the 28th. And should you have any questions, keep them coming, because we will provide answers to those questions. And you can also view this video on our Facebook page. So without further ado, thanks everybody. Have a great day.